007 Quantum of Solace, the game, was well known at the time for essentially being a 007 branded Call of Duty, which made complete sense because it was developed by Call of Duty developer Treyarch. However, just 9 months before release, the game was a complete and total mess with basically no trajectory. There was no game, there was no AI, it was just a third-person model you could move around a handful of rough test maps, a creative director who'd just quit, and a completely demoralized B team of developers who were working in the shadow of a much larger World at War team. Today we're diving in and having a look at Activision and Daniel Craig's first Bond video game outing and having a thorough examination of both the single player and the multiplayer, as well as uncovering some fascinating insight into its troubled development as the game's narrative director, Adam Gascoigne, graciously agreed to help out and share his experience with the game from behind the scenes. Before really digging our teeth in, it's worth framing how exactly the Quantum of Solace game came to be. Prior to this, Electronic Arts were the Bond's developer, starting with Tomorrow Never Dies in 1999 with a 10-year publishing contract that was set to end in 2009. They went headfirst into a yearly release schedule with the franchise, which saw some success with games like The World Is Not Enough, Agent Under Fire, Nightfire, and Everything or Nothing, until it didn't when the weird GoldenEye rogue agent and the Connery starring From Russia with Love didn't wow critics or hit sales targets. Amidst development of a third-person Casino Royale game that never saw the light of day, EA cancelled the Bond contract sometime around 2005 to 2006, about 3 or 4 years earlier than it was initially meant to end. They stated that they wanted to move away from licensed games, which, to be fair, they actually did mostly move away from licensed games after a prolific amount of tie-ins with franchises like The Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter alongside 007. At E3 of 2006, it was announced that Activision had bought the Bond game rights until 2014 for a reported but unconfirmed $50 million. After all those yearly Bond games stopped coming out, and with the release of the new generation of consoles, the 3-year gap between the From Russia with Love game in 2005 and the Quantum of Solace game in 2008 felt excruciatingly long for those who cared, and the prototypical console shooter had really evolved beyond more old-school shooters like Halo and, coincidentally enough, the original GoldenEye game, with newer, fresher, modern shooters like Call of Duty and Gears of War. So Quantum of Solace decided that it would blend Call of Duty and Gears of War. 007 games often serve as a reflection of the video game shooter market at the time of release, and I don't think that there's a better example of this than with Quantum. By day, it's a COD game running on the COD 4 engine with aim-down sights, only 2 guns at once, awkwardly holding the reload button to pick up weapons, quickly regenerating health, grenade tossing with a single button, but press a button near cover, and by night it's a third-person Gears of War game complete with blind fire and cover switching. Leave cover, and you're back in first person. The game also pulls back into third person for some light platforming and the takedowns, which replace just knifing people in COD with a slower, quick-time single button press third-person animation. While messaging Adam, the game's narrative director, I got the impression the reason for the Call of Duty style gameplay was out of necessity, as again the game was basically cobbled together in just 9 months. The 9-month mark is significant not only because the project was a complete mess, but because this is when Quantum's original creative director quit, so Adam and his co-worker Jeremy Luties were moved over from Call of Duty to take over as Quantum's narrative and gameplay directors respectively, and they helped refocus the project into what it ended up becoming. So what exactly did the game end up becoming? Well, the game opens where Casino Royale ends and bridges the off-screen gap between Mr. White's estate and the car chase the Quantum of Solace film opens with. The gap involves a massive shootout because, as usual with Bond movie games, this does retell the film's story, but it splices in massive shootouts everywhere. You shoot your way through White's garden, through his greenhouse, and then through his regular house before finally capturing him. So much for Bond just grabbing him on those stairs like in the movie. Now, I personally remember really enjoying this game back in the day. Like, my childhood was dictated by Bond games and my teenage years by COD games, so a mix of the two was almost a dream come true, but playing it again in 2019, my first impressions just weren't that great. Rose-tinted glasses remember the game having much nicer visuals, and while that's kind of to be expected with like basically every game you grew up with, you compare this to World at War, which only came out 2 weeks later, and this just looks really flat and under-detailed, which is especially disappointing as it often struggles to hit its 30 frames per second goal on both PS3 and 360. Thankfully, it did release on the PC, but since it was a Steam game and Activision lost the license, it was pulled from the store and it's now very expensive and very hard to find a new copy or a key. I was also a bit disappointed with how the gameplay itself felt, and at first I couldn't figure out exactly why. But after playing for a while, I realized that there are just some minor quirks that make the whole experience not as smooth as it should be, with the main one being that if you press the aim down sights button while sprinting, nothing happens. So the only way to cancel out of a sprint is either by waiting until you run out of energy by running the full stretch, which is just a really weird thing to do, or by awkwardly pulling the left stick back. This might not sound like much, but it feels really, really bad. And while the cover system isn't bad, it does have its rough spots too. Like, while there is cover switching, it's pretty inconsistent as to where you can actually switch to, and moving around a corner while in cover is simply not doable. But still, it's basically a Call of Duty game, so it's otherwise exceptionally smooth, fun, and responsive. It just has a few hiccups. The first level ends with you shooting down a helicopter that Mr. White is trying to escape in, and you're hit with a very awkwardly executed casino-esque gun barrel sequence. You're then hit with a classic Bond title sequence complete with an original song made for the game, rather than that Jack White and Alicia Keys thing that I know everyone loves. Though I can't play this for copyright reasons, I think most of you would still agree that this song is actually quite a bit better than Another Way to Die, but unfortunately the intro intersplices a rendered version of the opening car sequence from Quantum, which is annoying not only because the engine and road sounds are played over the top of the song, which just kind of ruins it, but also because it's a big missed opportunity making the driving just part of the intro cutscene instead of something playable, especially considering how well the series had done driving missions in the past, though obviously it's understandable given the game's unstable development. We also see an impressive cast return with Daniel Craig, Judi Dench, Olga Kurilenko, and Matthew Amalric, along with some names from the Casino cast appearing with Mads Mikkelsen and Ava Green, which raises some questions. We'll get to that later. The second level is a sewer level, which doesn't help with my first impressions, not only by virtue of it being a sewer level, but because the level design is just bland and one note. You know, corridors, small areas with waist-high cover, explosive barrels, it's nothing to write home about. It does open up a bit as you make your way onto the Sienna rooftops, which look a lot nicer than anything we've seen so far, but it's still just not playing that well. It does end with a QTE version of a fight from the film, which is nice though. We then reenact one of the best scenes from the movie set during the opera, and while this doesn't play out in the same way or have the same level of bravado, it does breathe a glimpse of life into the game from a design perspective, as part of the level is a wider, more arena-style area that plays a lot better than anything so far. It's still very, very basic, but just having enemies come from different angles and having access to a few different doors and paths opens up the game so much, especially when all you've been doing so far is just moving from cover to cover. The level also introduces some simple line-of-sight stealth stuff and features a sniping segment which vaguely mirrors the movie, except, you know, there's no one in the crowd here, and in the movie Bond isn't actually sniping, but hey, at least he and Green were kind of in the same spots. Also, this sniping segment is completely ruined by the fact that you still have a crosshair while in cover, so you can just sort of aim perfectly before peeking, but it's trying new things at least. You're then thrust into a decent shorter level set in the cave that Bond and Camilla land in, and I did actually lose myself to the game a bit here with the shootouts, and it reminded me why I like COD campaigns so much. I also enjoyed taking out another helicopter, which weirdly isn't the last one that you'll take down in this game. But those fun moments were fleeting, and they were taken away by a lengthy, boring turret section where the enemies yell sentences like, "I'm coming from his left," which really doesn't make much sense if you think about it. The level ends with Camille sharing how she tragically lost her family, though she says it in the most rushed and awkward way possible, and then Bond responds by sharing how he's lost people too, referring to the events of Casino Royale.
Why are you after Medrano?
When I was a child, General Medrano came to our house. He shot my father, then strangled my mother and sister. I was too young to be any trouble. Next time will be different.
Seems we're both using Green to get to somebody.
Then you lost somebody too.
The game then suddenly flashes back to Casino Royale, all the way back to Madagascar, just to start the explanation of how Bond lost someone too. While at first it seems like this might only be a few quick missions or even just a cutscene to add context to what's going on, because after all the Quantum story doesn't work at all without Casino, almost the rest of the game is straight up just Casino Royale. With 15 levels in total, 10 of them are Casino Royale levels, and at this point we've already seen 4 of the Quantum levels. This is very much a Casino Royale game with some Quantum stuff sprinkled in, despite the game's title. So initially I thought that this maybe could have been because the game might have started out as a Casino Royale game, but after reaching out to Adam, he clarified what happened here. In his words, the game focused more on Casino Royale, mostly due to limited information regarding Quantum of Solace. Dan Jack, who own the Bond franchise, are very cautious about who they let into the inner circle. They gave us as much as they could, but information was hard to come by. We were invited onto the set to meet the production team and got to show Daniel Craig an early build of the game, but we had to do a lot of of guessing. We did know that the new Bond meant a new narrative history starting with Casino Royale, so as that was now canon, we relied heavily on it. The game started development a year or so before we knew anything about Quantum of Solace, so many design decisions were made based on the first Daniel Craig movie out of necessity. The relationship between Treyarch and the production team was, to put it frankly, quite distant, which is a shame considering how much fanfare there is behind Bond, and with a project that's already well behind schedule, it only made sense to simply develop on the solid base that was Casino Royale, which is why it isn't surprising that the Casino Royale levels are a step above the Quantum levels in virtually every way. Like the Madagascar chase scene, for example, is executed really well here. It's breakneck with a constant timer, and it feels like it raises the bar when it comes to production value. Moments like Bond falling on that roof or crashing through that wall are recreated here, and an exciting Bond soundtrack plays in the background. In fact, this game sounds really great from start to finish, with the soundtrack being a more traditional orchestral score that incorporates the Bond theme a lot, something that the movie stayed away from, and the sound effects are really punchy and realistic.
007, go!
And this heightened production value continues through the rest of the casino levels, presumably because they had more time and a clearer picture to work with, but I also think it's because the game starts to lean a lot heavier into sneaking around, which means Treyarch had to make the areas look nicer because they're expecting you to go a lot slower through them. And surprisingly enough, the stealth isn't actually that bad. I mean, it's bad. Like, it's budgety and dodgy at times, but it's also kind of not bad. Like, initially I thought it was incredibly awful because it isn't introduced or explained very well, but once you figure out that you can use the map to find cameras, and cameras are disabled by finding a nearby fuse box rather than shooting them, then it becomes a lot better. It's still simple line of sight stuff, but sneaking around feels way more Bond than the grand shootouts, which is good because the game generally has a problem with feeling like a Bond game. There's not much gadget use beyond a mobile phone, and there's not a lot more going on than just shootout after shootout, but while stealthing around, the super spy flavor bleeds back into the game as the cover system and the takedown system start to make a lot more sense here, and it's complemented by a reaction-based hacking minigame to open doors. But there are issues. Once you're caught, you can't retreat and go back into hiding to let the enemies reset like with most stealth games, so it just turns straight back into being a full-blown shooter again. And when you do get caught, it's far too easy to just shoot your way through the rest of the level, so I'd wager that most people who played this don't even really remember the stealth at all because there isn't really an incentive to engage with it. Of course, you can always play on the hardest difficulty, so you're punished more for getting caught, but then you've got to play on the hardest difficulty for the rest of the game, which, if you've ever played a Call of Duty game on the hardest difficulty and you're not a masochist, you know that it isn't particularly fun. It also doesn't help that the AI will sometimes catch you far too easily, and other times they won't see what's right in front of them. Oh, and to say there's hitbox issues would be putting it lightly.
I'm moving in.
Despite that moment, this is actually one of the best levels in the game. Not only does it look gorgeous, but it's paced nicely too, as it opens with some of the best stealth segments the game has to offer, before it ramps up into a large arena-styled shootout playing to the strengths of the COD formula. And then it ends with a really punchy QTE recreation of the staircase scene from the movie. The QTEs here are harmlessly easy, so it actually works quite well. Like, I didn't fail one of them in my entire playthrough. This level is coupled with a GoldenEye-esque train level before it, which starts with a video game version of that Eva Green introduction scene in Casino, and proceeds with you uncharting your way up a moving train in another well-designed set-piece filled sequence. I love how the wind pushes against you and makes it hard to move, and this is one of the only stages where you get to use the extremely overpowered shotgun, which is a lot of fun. I only wish it was in the game more. The rest of the casino levels don't quite reach the same highs, but they are at least generally better than the opening Quantum levels in terms of pace and design. The problem is they're just too standard and bland, with way too much of an industrial warehouse feeling to them. Even the airport level, which was a fantastic scene in the movie ending with that great runway action sequence, just has one too many industrial areas, and instead of the runway action scene, you just shoot the bad guy trying to get to a stationary plane while inside of what's basically another warehouse. Oh, and another one of these missions has you take out another helicopter. I guess this game just has a thing for taking down helicopters. Detracting from the whole experience are these really poor briefing screens before each mission that have M and Bond chattering over visuals based on the MI6 UIs from the film, and they really flimsily piece the plot together. They often retell scenes from the movie, but they don't establish enough context to make the game actually followable, so you really need to have seen the movies to understand what's going on. And even then, there are some differences with the Quantum story, making it even more confusing.
Sorry, ma'am. Did you say Mitchell?
Yes, Mitchell, my bodyguard. Alert the Sienna Station Chief. Mitchell's betrayed us.
Quantum of Solace, the movie, famously ran into some trouble due to the 2007 writers' strike. Like, it was at the point where they only had a bare-bones structure and couldn't employ a writer, so Daniel Craig himself had to help write some scenes. Now, consider the distant relationship between Treyarch and the production team, who are writing the script as they go, and it's not surprising that the game's story was so flimsy and slightly inaccurate. I don't think the production team particularly cared that we were making a game, Adam writes. They were nice enough to us, but for example, the Quantum of Solace script was rewritten several times, and we were always at least 1 or 2 drafts behind the latest script. We never actually got the final script. We operated mostly on rumors, inside rumors, but rumors nonetheless. This is why there ended up being some differences between the game and the movie. In fact, there should have been a lot more differences, but we made some lucky guesses based on knowledge of locations and character arcs. The writer's strike didn't affect us directly, but as the script changed frequently, we basically just knew who was alive or dead, where they were going, and that Bond was going to live. This uncertainty behind what Quantum of Solace actually was also pushed the team further towards simply just recreating Casino Royale, and it's probably likely the reason why Casino Royale content makes so many more interesting strides and takes more risks. For example, there's a really short level where you play the part of the film where Bond is poisoned and has to make it to his car, and it sticks out like a sore thumb because it's really the only time the game tries anything out of the ordinary. It's almost more weird than welcome, but it's not a bad moment. It's actually really refreshing seeing NPCs that aren't trying to shoot you for once. I'd have loved it if the game tried to do a lot more goofy things like this, like maybe they could have had you play in the poker game or, drive a car. Something I'm surprised they even tried to recreate is the finale of Casino, where Bond follows Vesper in Venice, which could have been something really interesting, but instead it's just a bunch of shootouts. They're fun enough, but it just kind of feels like another level, which is pretty weird all things considered. You do get to shoot that bad guy with the nail gun in a neat little moment though. I just wish you could use this nail gun in the rest of the game. Also, Vesper dying here doesn't quite carry the same emotional weight that it did in the film. The game then cuts all the way back to the caves with Bond and Camille still standing in the exact same positions. Camille shared her story in about 5 seconds, and Bond went into a 3-hour recollection, and it still wasn't followable. Suddenly we're at the passable final level in that nonsense hotel in the middle of the desert, and you shoot your way through a bunch of explosions. You shoot down Green in a boss battle that's so brief it's barely a boss battle, and you reach the finale after some of the strangest pacing in a video game that I've ever seen. The final cutscene has Bond saying that he's going in to kill Mr. White, which is actually the original ending to the movie that was cut. If only Treyarch knew that. Despite everything, this single player as a whole is actually quite enjoyable. A rocky start and some inconsistencies don't stop it from being a fun 4-hour-long Bond-flavoured Call of Duty game, if that's what you're after. But again, it does struggle with that Bond flavouring. All too often the game can feel a bit too bland, and it's easy to forget that it's even meant to be Bond, but there is somewhat of a reason for this. Apparently, there is, or at least was, something called a Bond Bible, which is a massive tome of rules about the Bond universe that can't be broken. Even simple decisions became very difficult for Treyarch because of it. They tried to add a homeless person to the background of a scene to give it life, but it had to be cut because the Bond universe has no homeless people. They tried to add a Bond Legends mode where you fought against classic Bond villains, and that wasn't allowed. They tried to let you play as classic Bond actors, not allowed. And perhaps what would have really helped with the Bond feel the most, they tried to add some unique and new gadgets to Bond's arsenal, and again, it just wasn't allowed. These restrictions were held over the creative side of development, making it really cumbersome and slowing down the decision making. Speaking of not feeling like a Bond game at all, this brings us to the multiplayer, which is to no one's surprise, budget Call of Duty. Unfortunately, there's no split screen like in Bond games as past, but what is surprising is that, at least on PS3, it still seems to work work online. There's no one playing it anymore, of course, so I had to gather a group of you guys together in the Discord and revive Quantum of Duty for another multiplayer evening almost 11 years after release. The game's control issues still stand, like I'll always find it uncomfortable that you can't aim down sights to cancel out of a sprint, but otherwise this has all the same beats as a COD game, from the map design to the bad respawn locations. We were having a grand old time blasting Linkin Park, abusing overpowered weapons and teabagging each other like we're stuck in 2008. With 12 maps and 7 modes, apparently the only mode anyone ever played was the COD-style team deathmatch, which again isn't at all surprising. You just know that the Bond versus and Bond evasion modes died on impact, with the former having one player as Bond fighting everyone else to defuse a couple of bombs on the map, and the latter is basically the VIP mode from Counter-Strike, where one team has to protect Bond as he gets to an exit, with the other team trying to kill Bond. While we had some fun playing these, they are very gimmicky. Then there's a typical King of the Hill mode and a free-for-all mode, which are both exactly what you'd think they are. We really enjoyed the Golden Gun mode. Everyone's fighting each other in a free-for-all to pick up the Golden Gun, which looks nothing like the original Golden Gun and shoots massive explosives. It's just kind of absurd, but it's good fun. Finally, the mode we played the most of was Classic mode, which has you picking up weapons around the map, and it felt like an old school split-screen Bond game. Like, it was a grand old time, but part of the reason we liked it so much is because only private matches work these days, and private matches don't let you unlock new guns, so this is the best we could get beyond the base loadouts. The way the unlocking did work when it did work was basically you earned money to buy weapons, and you use those weapons to build Call of Duty style loadouts. Though I couldn't experience this stuff, I did read up on old posts from back in the day, and it seems like it was quite well liked, with people eventually unlocking golden weapons just to show how baller they are. It's just Call of Duty. Oh, and this has a fully recreated version of the N64 GoldenEye's facility map, which was a really pleasant surprise. Like, it's goofy as because they've changed it around a bit by adding new paths, but it's very much still the same map for the most part, and it was just really novel and unexpected seeing it reimagined here. Interestingly, it's just called Chemical Plant rather than Facility. I wonder if that's like a copyright thing. So the multiplayer is a decent, fun enough budget Call of Duty, rounding out the complete package that is Quantum of Solace the game. Critics awarded the game with mostly some disappointing 6 out of 10, citing that it's not bad, but it's just too bland, too soulless, and too short. And while I'm more positive on the game than most critics were at the time, it's hard not to agree with those points. Considering this was basically all put together in just 9 months though, it's actually quite an accomplishment. The game could have easily been canned, but the project was turned around and a lot of the developers graduated from that B team and went on to become Call of Duty leads, with many of them still being at Treyarch today. I want to finish this on a heartwarming note with Adam's final statement about the game that he sent to me. So overall, I would say that it was a very difficult development process that resulted in a short, underdeveloped game that had some heart and the potential to be something good with a few more months to finish it. As the release date could not move, we had to put the best we could in the box. It broke a few hearts to do it, and the Bond team would have loved a chance to do it all again without the shifting management positions, but it wasn't to be. The final game was poorly received. The team behind it, however, proved themselves and went on to bigger and better things. The resurrection of the talent that had been forgotten in the Bond team is one of my proudest accomplishments, and Jeremy feels the same. We walked into a room of dead man walking, kept everyone employed, and eventually watched them take over Treyarch. Hell yeah. And with that, we wrap up our look at Quantum of Solace. I really want to thank Adam for helping me out here. He was super candid, he was super gracious. It was just great to have that insight and to sort of uncover what happened there. Adam, thank you so much. I also want to talk about how the game was released on other platforms. So this is like very much the main version of the game, but there was also a version on Wii, PS2, and DES. I don't think I'm leaving any out. And they're all very different. Even the Wii and the PS2 versions are different. And I might cover them sometime. I've heard people actually say that the PS2 version is even better than this version, which I kind of find hard to believe, but it's got me curious, so I'll look into it. And if it's cool enough, I'll make another video. But at the moment, what I want to do is go through the rest of the Activision games. So I'd like to hit up Bloodstone next, followed by GoldenEye or GoldenEye Reloaded, and 007 Legends, which are all interesting games in their own right. And if you'd like to join in on the multiplayer game nights, go to my website, which is in the description, and join the Discord. And that's how we kind of organize the nights. So if you want to join in, type !multi, like !multi, just in chat, and it'll give you a role which will update you whenever we post an update about a game night that might be happening. And we recently had one for Deus Ex, which was a lot of fun. So yeah, if that interests you, that's a thing you can do. And I also want to ramble about just Quantum of Solace. I wanted to put this in the video somewhere, but I figured it would interrupt it too much. But the Quantum of Solace movie, I think, gets a really bad rap. I think that the Jack White and Alicia Keys song is actually not that bad. I kind of like it low-key. And the movie works really, really well as an addendum to Casino. I think that if you watch Casino and Quantum as a double feature, it works really well. And I know that it gets a bad rap because of its editing and its shaky cam, which is completely like justified. Those two things suck. And you know, the script is a little simplistic, but I know people, I mean, it's simplistic in some ways and overcomplicated in other ways, but I know a lot of people go really hard on like the villain's motivations and the whole water in Bolivia thing, but I don't think that's that bad. I think it's kind of realistic-ish. Like, I don't know, I think it's a good little movie. It works really well as a two-parter. It's at least better than Spectre. Can we agree on that? So yeah, thanks for watching. I'd really appreciate it if you clicked like, or subscribed or clicked the bell or any of that stuff. Like, this was a really big video for me to make, so that kind of stuff really helps out the channel. I've been rambling for a few minutes now. I've got to get on to thanking my patrons, so I'd like to thank all my patrons, including the ones that are coming up on the screen right now, and especially including Adam Beals, Analog Man, Brighton Robinson, Caden the Dingo, Dad, Devon Grant Dahl, Dominic Chikoki, Dump Truck Parked in My Driveway, Evil Chicken, Homer821, Casey, Labcat, Lucas Ray Sevic, Magnus Ikomo Stavik, Mattias Bayes, Maximilian Kunzman, May Aris Mazaki, Melanie G, Minimme keeps sending me communist Minimme keeps sending me communist propaganda via Patreon, Mrs. Minimme, Mustache Duct Tape, Peaceful Kumquat, Review Disney Planes, Riverside Renegade, Thomas Damsgaard, Tommy Carver Chaplin, Trixie Emerson, Under 10 Hours, Writing on Games, and Zindictive. Thank you so much for supporting the show. If you'd like to support yourself, a link to my Patreon is in the description, and there's some, behind the scenes content kind of stuff you can check out. I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, I've already thanked you for watching, so I hope you're having a wonderful evening or day or morning or whatever's going on, and I'll see you next time. Take it easy.